The bill hasn't arrived yet. That's the part most people don't understand about what's happening right now. The thing that started in the Persian Gulf in late February 2026 is not a news story you follow from a distance. It is a financial event moving toward your grocery bill, your mortgage rate, your summer vacation, and your credit card statement on 5 separate timelines, each one arriving disguised as something completely unrelated to a military operation you watched on your phone between meetings. The gas price is the decoy. It's the thing everyone notices, files under frustrating, and moves on from. That filing is wrong, not because the gas price doesn't matter, but because it's the smallest of 5 waves, and most people will spend the rest of 2026 getting hit by waves 2 through 5 without ever connecting them back to the moment they actually started. My name is William. I do math that most people find uncomfortable. Today we're going through all 5 waves, what they are, when they land, and what to do before they arrive. Because the households that come through economic shocks in better shape are never the ones who earned the most. They're the ones who understood what was coming before it did. The context, because without it, none of the math makes sense. On February 27, 2026, Oman's foreign minister announced progress in U.S.-Iran nuclear negotiations, active diplomatic talks, real momentum. 24 hours later, the U.S. and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes across Iran. The timing will be debated for decades. That's a problem for historians. The problem for your wallet is what followed. Iran retaliated across 6 Gulf nations. Oil infrastructure took direct damage, and by early March, the Strait of Hormuz, a 21-mile bottleneck carrying roughly 20% of the world's seaborne oil supply, was effectively closed. Normal traffic through the strait is 130 commercial vessels per day. Within 2 weeks of the conflict escalating, that number was approaching 0. The IEA called it the single largest energy supply disruption ever recorded, larger than the 1973 OPEC embargo, larger than the 1979 Iranian Revolution shock. They released 400 million barrels from emergency reserves, the largest release in the agency's history. That is not a routine policy adjustment. That is a fire extinguisher being aimed at something that is genuinely on fire. Brent crude went from $71 per barrel to a peak near $120 in weeks. It has pulled back on ceasefire signals, but if the disruption extends beyond 6 weeks, analysts are projecting $150 per barrel is on the table. What you see at the gas station is Wave 1. Here are all 5. Wave 1, gas, the one you can already see. The national average just crossed $3.96 per gallon, up from $2.94 at the start of the month. California is at $5.81. Diesel, the fuel that moves literally everything you purchase, hit $5.37 nationally, a 47% increase from pre-conflict levels. Here's why diesel matters more than the gas in your tank. Diesel powers the trucks, the refrigerated freight carriers, the farm equipment, the entire physical supply chain that connects everything you buy to wherever it was made. A $1 per gallon increase in diesel has a direct, documented transmission into the cost of every product that rides on a truck, which is most products. For the average household, this wave costs approximately $748 in additional annual fuel spending. That's $62 a month. It's uncomfortable. It's manageable on its own. The critical phrase there is on its own, because it's not on its own. And the feeling you'll start to notice, the bank account that looks lower than it should, the vague sense that money is moving faster without any specific explanation, that feeling is Wave 1, running quietly in the background while the real waves are still approaching. Wave 2, groceries, 30 to 60 days out. This one is already in motion. You just can't see it yet because the supply chain has a lag. Diesel doesn't just move cars, it moves food. Refrigerated trucks operate on schedules that don't allow for stockpiling. You cannot warehouse strawberries while you wait for fuel costs to stabilize.
When diesel spikes, freight carriers pass 60 to 80% of that increase within 30 to 60 days via fuel surcharge adjustments that update weekly. Before this conflict, grocery inflation was running at 2.4 to 4% annually. Economists are now projecting consumer price inflation climbing to 4.4% in coming months. Beef was already projected up 5.5 to 9.4% in 2026. Sugar up 6.7%, coffee 5.2%. Layer of 47% diesel spike on top of projections that were already uncomfortable, and what you get is a grocery bill in May that feels mysteriously higher than April's, with no single line item obviously to blame. Retailers will absorb what they can, but they've been absorbing tariff costs for over a year, and the cushion is largely exhausted. When the absorption capacity breaks, prices catch up fast and don't come back down slowly. The ground beef that costs more in May was priced in a Persian Gulf military operation you had no vote on. That's the global supply chain, extraordinarily efficient until it isn't. Wave 3, fertilizer, the invisible clock set for October. This is the wave almost nobody is connecting, and it's the one with the longest tail. Natural gas is the primary raw material for nitrogen fertilizer. Fossil fuels account for 70 to 90% of the cost of producing ammonia and urea, what farmers apply to the ground to grow essentially everything. And roughly a third of the world's seaborne fertilizer trade moves through the Strait of Hormuz, which is closed. Within the first week of the conflict, major Gulf producers declared force majeure and halted exports. Granular urea jumped 50% in weeks. At the primary U.S. import hub in New Orleans, prices rose 32% in a single week. In parts of the Midwest, fertilizer retailers stopped quoting prices entirely, not because the market was stable, but because they couldn't guarantee delivery. Here's the timing problem. Spring planting is happening right now. The decisions farmers are making this month determine the fall harvest. You will not feel this wave in April, you will feel it in October, standing in the produce aisle convinced you must be mismanaging your grocery budget. Nobody will announce this. There's no press conference scheduled for the fall harvest. It just quietly appears in your cart total 6 months after the cause, by which point February 28th feels like ancient history. This is the wave you can't fully prevent, but knowing it's coming means you won't be blindsided when it arrives, and not being blindsided is worth more than most people realize. Wave 4, airfare. Your summer trip already costs more. Jet fuel surged more than 60% following the strait closure. Fuel represents 25 to 33% of airline operating costs, the single largest expense category. When that number jumps 60% in 3 weeks, airlines face a binary choice: absorb the increase and damage their balance sheets, or pass it to customers. Airlines do not have a long institutional history of absorbing costs on behalf of passengers. Analysts are projecting 15 to 30% fare increases for summer 2026 travel, with June and July absorbing the sharpest impact. What's different about airline pricing versus grocery inflation is the recovery timeline. Airlines bake fuel costs into their revenue models months in advance. Even if oil drops tomorrow, the fares don't come down fast. The price you can book today is almost certainly lower than next month's price for the same seat. If you have summer travel planned and haven't booked, the window where booking makes financial sense is closing, not dramatically, quietly, the way these things always close. Wave 5, interest rates, the biggest one, the least visible. At the start of 2026, markets were pricing in multiple federal rate cuts this year: lower mortgage rates, cheaper auto loans, some relief on the credit card APR sitting at 21 to 24%. People were building plans around that expectation. That expectation is now functionally dead. The Fed held rates in their March meeting, and the bind therein is genuinely uncomfortable. Higher oil prices push inflation up. The same oil prices drag down consumer spending and slow the economy. The Fed's two mandates, stable prices and maximum employment, are now pointing in opposite directions simultaneously. Cutting rates to protect employment risks accelerating inflation. Holding rates to fight inflation risks accelerating a slowdown. Mortgage rates are currently sitting between 6.2 and 6.5%, up from 5.87% in February. Auto loans for qualified buyers are running around 7%. Credit card APRs average 21 to 24%. Americans are carrying $1.27 trillion in credit card debt at those rates. Recession probability estimates are now sitting between 30 and 50%, depending on how long the disruption extends.
What not to do? Because this matters as much as what to do. Research tracking over 1 million investor accounts found that the average equity investor has underperformed the S&P 500 for 15 consecutive years, not because of bad stock picks, because of one repeated behavior: selling during volatility and buying back in after recovery. 7 of the 10 best trading days over a 20-year period occurred during bear markets. 6 of those happened within 2 weeks of the worst days. The recovery doesn't arrive gradually. It arrives in violent upswings clustered directly beside the crashes. Missing just the 10 best trading days per decade since 1930 would have converted a nearly 15,000% total return into 91%. That is not a rounding error. That is the entire difference between building wealth and watching it get built by someone who stayed in while you waited on the sideline. Your nervous system evolved for a world where financial loss and physical danger were the same thing. It is not updated for index funds. Do not let it make this decision. What to actually do, starting this week. Your emergency fund needs to be larger and it needs to be earning something real. Nearly half of Americans cannot cover a $1,000 emergency without going into debt. When a car repair, a medical bill, or a home maintenance issue lands during a period where everything else costs more, the difference between having that money and not is the difference between an inconvenience and a credit card charge charging at 22% for the next 8 months. High-yield savings accounts are currently paying 4.0 to 4.2%, 10 times the national average. With the Fed frozen on cuts, those rates aren't moving soon. If you're carrying high-interest credit card debt, treat it as the emergency it is. Paying off a card charging 22% is mathematically identical to earning a guaranteed 22% return, tax-free. You cannot purchase that return anywhere else. Every month you carry that balance through rising prices and frozen rates is a compounding cost of inaction. Do not stop your investment contributions. Do not touch existing investments. The instinct to pause, move to cash, and see how this plays out is the most expensive financial mistake available to you right now. The people who paused contributions in March 2020 sat in cash and watched the fastest market recovery in history happen without them, then bought back in near the top. The contribution you set and forget today will historically rank among the better financial decisions you make this year. If you have summer travel planned, book it now. The 15 to 30% fare increases analysts are projecting haven't fully materialized yet. That window is closing on a schedule that has nothing to do with when you get around to checking. There are 2 versions of how this ends. The conflict resolves quickly, the strait reopens. The economic damage is sharp, contained, and recovers within 6 to 12 months, the way the 1990 Gulf War did. The people who adjusted early come through with minimal impact. The people who didn't notice slightly more for a few months and move on. Or it extends. The fertilizer shortage compounds into a genuine food price crisis by fall. The Fed stays trapped between inflation and slowdown. What started as a gas price story becomes something that takes years to fully unwind. Nobody knows which version is coming. What we do know is that the households that come through economic shocks in better shape are never the ones with the highest incomes. They're the ones who looked past the gas station sign and saw what was behind it, who made 5 boring, unglamorous adjustments while everyone else was still filing it under annoying but manageable.
The waves are coming regardless of whether you're watching for them. The only question is whether they find you prepared or find you surprised.